We're returning to our ocean studio. The summer storms that have progressed into the fall have come and gone, so we have a bit of a reprieve from the blustery winds and the rain, although you can see that it is still blowing a bit in the palm fronds behind me. Typically, when we move to the ocean studio, we're speaking of the Psalms, the Mizmor of Dowd, our Messiah, the Son of God, and our King. But in a previous episode, we wanted to explain some of Dowd's thoughts pursuant to his position relative to Yahowah and why he came to realize that it was appropriate for him to intervene as our Savior to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim, and that his people just did not understand, that they somehow had missed the entire intent of the Torah, and that they were therefore estranged from God, and that he alone was in a position to resolve that dispute. And since this is important, we're going to return to the first statement in Dabarym. That would be the book wrongly called Deuteronomy. It means words, in the 29th chapter, and it begins. These are the words, Dabarym, of the covenant, which lead to the benefits of the relationship. Yahowah instructed for Moshe to cut and to establish with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, which means who's your father, along with and as part of the covenant that he cut and associated with them in Choreb. So what God is announcing here, Dabarym 29:1, is that he is reaffirming the covenant that he established with Abraham, debuted and narrated through Abraham, that he then reinforced by revealing Dabarym, by revealing Bereshith, which would be known now as Genesis. It means in the beginning. That whole narrative is presented there in the opening book of the Torah, and therefore, I thought that Wookiee wanted to jump up on the table, but he looked away. And so he is affirming that that whole discussion was reinforced with the children of Israel in Choreb, which is where he presented to Moshe the book of in the beginning, which we call now Genesis, Bereshith. And now he is once again reminding them that they have been invited to be part of this familial covenant relationship. Whether or not they wish to participate, and unfortunately the answer is they did not. So we're finding that I bring up a glass of water or tea because when you speak for an hour at a time, sometimes your voice gets a little scratchy, and the beneficiary of that is Wookiee. So I'm glad that you were able to refresh yourself there, Wookiee. That's important. So that's the story here. That's why the introduction is written this way. The covenant that was narrated and then affirmed on Mount Moriah, with Abraham, has now seen its reaffirmation, if you will, here on Choreb with the children of Israel, and then is now being reiterated. And this is the Torah through which Moshe on Mount Choreb established, delineated for the purpose of sharing the fact that there are 5 conditions and 5 benefits associated with it, all of which are fulfilled through the establishment of the Moed Mikra, the 7 steps that we are invited to walk to Yahowah. So as we continue with this narration from God through Moshe. It reads, and Moshe summoned, calling out to, speaking of the mikre, it's the verb that serves as the heart of mikre. It means to summon, to call out, to invite to a meeting, to welcome, to read and to recite. It is kara. All of Israel, saying to them, you yourselves have witnessed everything that Yahowah acted upon and engaged in before your eyes in the realm of the crucibles of oppression in Mitzrayim, known as Egypt, before Pharaoh, before all of his servants, and throughout his land. They had been slaves, they were liberated, they had witnessed everything that Yahowah had done on their behalf, and now here they were as witnesses to God's great favor on their behalf. This is Dabarym, Deuteronomy 29:2. And that should have put them in a position where they were receptive and appreciative. Unfortunately, it didn't. So this tremendously great experience of examination and validation and of getting the desired response, which for the benefit of the relationship you saw, witnessing with your own eyes, the appearance of the conspicuous and important signs announcing future events, and the remarkably extraordinary indications of amazing things which were to come. This is Dabarym 29:3. Moshe is reemphasizing that this was an extraordinary experience, and it should have left an indelible mark on the minds and hearts of the children of Israel, so that they should have given Yahowah tremendous respect. They should have appreciated him for what he had done for them. Continues, this tremendously important and empowering opportunity for examination of getting the desired response, this time of testing and period of evaluation for your benefit, and for this relationship which you saw witnessing with your eyes, the appearance of the conspicuous and important signs announcing future events, the prophetic proof statements regarding these promises, which are predictive, accurately confirming that which will occur, along with the miraculous means of communicating the message with distinctive banners and characteristic signals regarding future provisions, laden with tremendous portent, along with great expectations of things which will occur, then brilliant examples which correspond to future events, communicating that which is vitally important, enabling us to respond appropriately and grow. The Dabarym, a very expressive version of God's words, never should have been called Deuteronomy 29:3. Should you have wondered why few, if any, would come to appreciate Yahowah's approach to revelation and understanding, well, we now know. And this is going to reemphasize something that I said yesterday and the day before, and even the day before that I'm sure has some of you a bit perplexed, because it is a very profound statement that goes right to the heart of the lie that is Judaism. But Yahowah has not bestowed, giving you the judgment or the inclination to yada, to know or to understand, or the eyes or perceptiveness to see, or even the ears to hear, up to this point in time and beyond on this day. Dabarym words, Deuteronomy 29:4. And there you have it. I know that there have been some who are not pleased with my conclusion that the Torah, while offered to the children of Israel, was not for them, but instead for us. And this is affirmation of it. This is an irrefutable confirmation that the conclusion that I deduced and shared so openly was accurate. The Torah, while given in the presence of the children of Yisrael during the Exodus, was not for them. They paid no attention to it. They were blind to the instructions in it. They rather despised the God who shared it with them. They reneged on the covenant relationship he was offering. They chose to be religious. They chose to add to it and to take away from it with their Talmud, with their oral law. And what this confirms is that Yahowah, having seen their response to him, where they told him to shut up and go away, they never wanted to hear from him or see him again, something that is reaffirmed in the 18th chapter of Dabarym, that God realized that he really needed to be careful here, that this could be disastrous. Because if the Jews during the Exodus had promulgated their myths using Yahweh's name, had they conveyed aspects of the Torah accurately, including the purpose and intent of the Bereth covenant and that of the Mikre invitations to be called out and meet, and then twisted and perverted some aspect of it, that far more damage would have been done than their wholesale denunciations of Yahweh's name, of his covenant, and of his Mikre invitations to meet. And so what God did is says, I'm just going to blind you. I'm going to blind you. I'm going to make you deaf. I'm going to dull your thought process so that you're just going to be clueless. All you're going to do is wallow all over yourselves and swim in your own vomit. You're not going to be able to corrupt my testimony. I'm just going to preclude it. So rather than being in a position to correctly analyze the creation account and know how 16 billion years, 15 billion years from our perspective here on Earth, looking back on the Big Bang, is actually 6 24-hour days, and that Maimonides therefore was wrong, and dating the Jewish calendar to creation as opposed to the day that Adam and Chava were booted out of Eden. He was, and they are, unable to understand why it was Noach that was chosen and guided in the building of the ark. And instead, the religious Jews have replaced that lesson with Noad laws, none of which are in the Torah. They just simply replaced a teaching about the value of the covenant relationship and of listening to God and doing as he asked with this whole tirade of religious lies, Noahide laws. And then you look at the whole story of Abraham and Sarah, and they're clueless to the fact that the reason God reached out to Abraham was that he and his wife Sarah had rejected the religiosity and the politics of Babylon and had walked out of that place, and that it was only then that God could approach them, and they don't understand that. There isn't a rabbi to this day over thousands of years who have understood that the covenant is about a relationship with God, and that its prerequisite is to not be religious. Not a one. And so they have been blinded to this profoundly important truth. They don't know that there are 5 conditions or 5 benefits. They are completely blinded to the fact that the 7 Moed Mikre, which they are clueless to understand, deliver the benefits of that Bereth covenant. And by not being able to corrupt Yahweh's testimony, but instead wallowing in their own vomit, they have done no harm to the Torah or to Yahweh's name or to his plan, and have simply embarrassed themselves. And that is the condition up to this point in time. And that means that the Torah that was delivered through Moshe 3,450 years ago wasn't for them. It wasn't for them because they didn't want it. They preferred to replace it with their Talmud. And when God heard that from them, when they told God to shut up and go away, they never wanted to see him or hear from him again. He said, okay, well, two can play this game. I'm just going to blind you. I'm going to make you deaf and dumb. And that's just the way it's going to be. And then I will find a guy who is not of Israel, who I will awaken, who I will choose, and he will respond, and he'll figure it out. He will deduce what I have been offering and what I'm expecting in return, and he will communicate it to you so that at least some of you can respond favorably after 34 centuries of rejecting everything God has offered. It's a very profound statement, exceedingly important statement, and one that brings us to why the 35 volumes of Yahowah exist and are offered freely at yahowah.com, why we're doing the Yahowah blog. You have been given the opportunity to shed this blockage in your hearing, to shed the scales over your occluded vision, to remove the wall around your heart and your thinking and mind. This is your opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. Yahweh says, I have walked with you 40 years. This could be Yahweh's voice or Moshe's voice, since Yahweh was speaking through Moshe's mouth, one and the same. I have walked with you for 40 years in the wilderness, in this place where one asks the who, what, why, where, and when questions regarding the Abar word. That is a statement of fact, and the only reason they were 40 years in the wilderness was because when he brought them forthrightly to the promised land, they rejected it, just as they rejected God, his voice, the Torah, the covenant. They rejected the land as well. God goes on to say, your garments did not wear out, nor did they become obsolete from upon you. Your sandals did not decompose from upon your feet. The Dabarym words should not have been called Deuteronomy 29:5. Well, that's true, and it was another just obvious sign that they were being protected. And that matzah, unyeasted bread, is symbolic of removing the fungus of religion and governance, militarism and conspiracy from our souls. Lakem, the bread infused with yeast, is seen as corrupt. Therefore, once they had availed themselves of the benefits of Pesach and matzah, these Bikurim were kept pure prior to entering the promised land, is what we are going to be presented with next. It says, you have not consumed bread or wine, intoxicating beverages you have not drunk, so that for the purpose of serving as a witness, you might otherwise know, yada, that indeed I am Yahweh. Too bad. They were unwilling to do that, or to recognize that Yahweh is your God. Dabarym 29:6. It takes a clear head to appreciate the things of God. For those who do so, they have the privilege of serving as witnesses, testifying to what we have come to know, yada, about Yahweh. It's the highest calling and our best use of our lives. Observe the words associated with the covenant. Closely examine and carefully consider the bereth, this family-oriented relationship agreement, and act upon and engage in it so that you may become an effective witness and provide answers, becoming a teacher, gaining insights by coming to understand, and then being circumspect, sakal, being prudent, and prospering by paying attention to the instructions so that you might comprehend with regard to everything you do, acting upon or engaging in that which leads to the benefit of the relationship. Dabarym words, Deuteronomy 29:9. It's a wonderful expression of God's will for our lives. When it comes to knowing Yahowah and engaging in a relationship with Him, becoming part of His covenant family, it all begins with shamar, being observant. And this leads to shakal, gaining the insights needed to serve as a lama'an, a witness, our highest calling. You are standing this day, all of you, before the presence of Yahowah, your God. The beginning and finest aspects of your familiar associations, your mature men, your scribes, all of the individuals who comprise Yisrael, even your little ones, your wives and your women, and the foreigners from different ethnicities other than your own, who are all camping out in your midst. From the one who chops your wood to the one who draws your water. A very graphic and visual depiction of where they were and who they were, as reported in Dabarym words 29:10 and 11. So you'll note that the men and women were not separated as they are in Judaism, and women were counted among the best of Yisrael, which is as it should be, but not as the religious require. Yahweh's relationship with Yisrael has never been monotheistic, or monolithic, I should say, but is instead based upon young and old, men and women, even other ethnicities, as long as they seek to be part of the same family. That's why Yisrael actually identifies those who engage and endure with God, regardless of their ethnicity. What appears, and by the way, also their gender, or their age, or their affluence. What appears particularly interesting, in addition to the inclusiveness of the covenant and its broad base, is the mention of 3 occupations pertaining to 1, writing, 2, chopping wood, and 3, drawing water. Everything we know about Yahowah has come by way of the scribes who wrote the testimony that God conveyed through his prophets on parchment. Wood was used to build homes, cook food, and illuminate the darkness, keeping us warm and nourished, enlightened and protected, safe and comfortable. But most importantly, wood for the fire, which is the purpose of chopping it, is that transformative force that takes our physical bodies, which he has just spoken of, and protecting them and transitions them into light and energy so that our souls can rise to the occasion and be so much more than we would otherwise be. And of course, water is what cleanses and restores life. That is why these 3 occupations were listed. Well, I'd be shocked if there were a Christian who has read through any of these books up to this point who still believes anything that he or she was told by a priest or pastor. This next statement ought to be more than sufficient to resolve the matter of faith. The covenant Paul condemned as enslaving, the one he replaced with his contradictory New Testament, is Yahowah's, who just so happens to be God. Moreover, one approaches it through Abar, which is the verb that has brought us the defining meaning of Passover. It reads, "This is so you may approach and pass into, la Abar ataba, you can travel and draw near, crossing over into, come to possess a share of by passing through to the covenant." Bereth, the family-oriented relationship agreement, the pledge and binding oath, the contractual and mutually beneficial arrangement between God and his people. Of Yahowah, your God. The bereth is of Yahowah, your God, into his sworn agreement, his binding oath, which leads to the benefits of this relationship, Asher. Yahowah, your God, has cut, establishing it. Karat has made, creating this agreement through separation with stipulations, responsibilities, and benefits with you this day. Dabarym words, Deuteronomy 29:12. Quite frankly, nothing is more important or beneficial than approaching God and entering into the covenant in the manner he established. Stop praying. Stop confessing. Start living. Over the millennia, religious men have behaved badly, including those conducting human sacrifices to phony gods. But few things in all of that time have negatively affected more souls than the overt Christian replacement of Yahweh's covenant with supersessionalism. Those who do you suppose, therefore, motivated and inspired Paul to negate Yahweh's intent with his covenant relationship, to annul God's commitment to his family, and then to superimpose a different covenant, a New Testament, in its place? Of course, we know the answer because Paul admitted to being demon-possessed at the conclusion of his second letter to the Corinthians. But most remain unaware, which is why billions of souls have been lost to the mythology that has sought to denigrate, dehumanize, and demonize Jews through the Christian New Testament. The only thing worse has been the Jewish propensity to obfuscate Yahweh's name, doing so throughout their Talmud and their culture. Knowing it, acknowledging it, and professing it are essential to answering his invitation to approach and to pass into the covenant. And that is, this is his family, his name, and his title. Well, they're all continuously associated with him in it. And in this case, his name was spoken and written twice for our edification. There was no justification in erasing it or replacing it. Anytime you hear Hashem or G-D or Adonai, it should be like fingernails scratching against a blackboard. Surely, Yahweh didn't think that we would forget his name or be remiss in remembering that he is God in the time it took to recite this sentence. It cannot be the reason he repeated it. And yet, it is as if he knew his people would do the inconceivable. And they did. Yahweh clearly wanted us to know that we would be engaging directly with him. It is his name and reputation on the line, his word, that we would be trusting should we wish to engage in this covenant. Moreover, he wanted us to be aware of those who would be living together with us should we want to accept his invitation. We have said it repeatedly because Yahweh wants us to acknowledge that the covenant is his family. It is a sworn and binding agreement and therefore backed by the very word of God. Its stipulations lead us to the benefits of the relationship that our Heavenly Father is seeking to establish with his children. Being invited into Yahweh's family is a wonderful opportunity, enriching and empowering. And while it affords us with a tremendous amount of freedom, we're not given the authority to alter what God is offering or expects in return. There can never be and will never be anything akin to an inspired Talmud or an authorized Christian New Testament or Zohar. They are not the Word of God, but are instead the lives of men. Unlike the authors of those books, Yahowah does not break his promises. He is not capricious. He does not change his mind. He does not alter his approach. He does not contradict himself, all of which are required for either the Talmud, Zohar, or New Testament, as well as the Quran, to be true, meaning that they're false. With statements like this and the next one, it's a wonder that 5 people, much less 5 billion, believe that there is any validity to the Talmud, Quran, and New Testament. With the intent of providing answers and for the sake of enabling witnesses, he established you today as his people and family, and thereby he will continue to be your God, consistent with his communications with you and in keeping with what he promised to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitschaq, and to Jacob. Dabarym words should never have been called Deuteronomy 29:13. You see, the covenant was established with Abraham, Yitschaq, and Jacob, and confirmed with Yisrael. It was not annulled, renewed, or changed by Gentile Christians. By his own admission, Yahowah has been Asher Dabar, consistent with his words and guidance, never wavering from what he, Shabbat, has promised. Yahowah chose to provide the answers we would need to form a relationship with him through Yisrael, which is why the descendants of Abraham through Yitschaq and Jacob were to be his witnesses. And while some, especially the likes of Moshe, Shamuel, Dowd, Eliah, Hosea, Yeshaya, Yirmiah, and Zechariah, were stupendous at it, the preponderance of Israelites shirked their responsibility and still do so to this day. It is not with you alone. God says that I am establishing this covenant. Indeed, this sworn agreement exists to show the way to whomever is here with us, present and standing upright at this time before the presence of Yahowah, our God. It is also for whoever benefits from the guidance along the correct path to the relationship, who is not among those present here in connection with this day. The Dabarym words should not have been called Deuteronomy 29:15. Had they capitalized upon it, the Torah instructions regarding the covenant would have been theirs to claim, their inheritance. They did not. They rejected it. And had it been their response to accept those terms and conditions, the Goy who were with them, it could have been theirs to claim as their inheritance as well, but they didn't either. And so God had to say, it's not just for you. It's also for those who have shown a willingness to be guided in this path to the relationship, who are not among those present, not here, not then, not in conjunction with this day, but with our day, in the here and now, which is why we have claimed its promises. And we're not claiming the promises just for ourselves, but to share them. If we only wanted to claim the Torah's covenant and the inheritance for ourselves, we wouldn't have written 35 books, published them, printed them, offered them freely at yadayah.com, or begun the Yahowah blog just a month shy of a year ago, would we? And matter of fact, it is in sharing this, by making these things known, that 100% of the angst that we endure comes our way. All we get in the here and now by sharing this with you is abuse. Yes, there are those who are joyously learning and contributing, and that is a tremendous thing to celebrate, and we do. But for the largest part, by sharing what God has conveyed through his Torah, I'm relentlessly attacked. It's very much like what the children of Israel did to Yahowah during the Exodus. They said, we want you to shut up. We don't ever want to see you again. And, there is now even a cult claiming to speak for Mommy God that is devoted to this thing, as if they have no other calling in life but to denounce me sharing what God is offering. Like they want to have it for themselves and to denounce it for everyone else. But nevertheless, there would be one covenant for all people and for all time. The covenant is a sworn agreement from Yahowah, and he has never reneged on a promise. While it is undeniably given initially to Yisrael, Goyim Gentiles who chose to stand with the chosen people have always been welcome, no matter where or when we may live. Of particular importance is the realization that Goyim, not Israelites, are incorporated into the one and only Bereth covenant. There has never been and never will be a new one or a different covenant for other ethnicities. Therefore, if a person opposes Jews or Israel, as is the case with most progressives, right-wing extremists, multiculturalists, Protestants and Orthodox Christians, Roman Catholics, Muslims and conspiratorialists, by way of this animosity alone, they have excluded themselves from the covenant and thus are estranged from God and banned from heaven. And because most of the world is antagonistic towards Jews and Israel, the overwhelming majority of people have excluded themselves from participating in a relationship with God. Now, it should be no surprise to anyone who isn't either ignorant or irrational, well, that would be 99% of the world today, that Muslims have been indoctrinated to hate, and they despise Jews. It should also be obvious that there is a rapidly increasing number of politicized individuals, both extremely liberal and ultra-conservatives, who are overtly hostile to both Jews and Israel. Moreover, the fastest growing belief system worldwide is conspiracy, the foundation of which is predicated on blaming Jews for almost everything. That is the theme of the influencers, is it not? Now, to the surprise of many, the putrid well from which this misguided abuse of Jews grew to become a worldwide phenomenon and threat is the Roman Catholic Church, alleged only, or challenged, I should say, only by Islam in their violent and degrading treatment of Jews. Popes have oppressed and demeaned God's people for a better part of 18 centuries. It is one of several reasons why the Roman Church is the whore of Babylon, and why the tyrannical Islamic fiefdoms represent geographical Babylon. Should you think that I'm biased or just making an uninformed generalization regarding Muslims and Catholics, then I would invite you to read Goddamn Religion and Twistianity, maybe followed by David Kurtzer's The Popes Against the Jews, or John Cromwell's Hitler's Pope. If you make it through them without coming to hate these religions, then you may want to have your head examined. As an alternative, and based upon what Yahweh just revealed, we enter into God's presence and are adopted into his family through the Torah. Therein we find the keys to heaven and the path to God's family. Consistently entering the doorways to synagogues, mosques, churches, temples, shrines, political edifices, and social media conspiracy sites, like X and Facebook, even YouTube, excludes believers from knowing God. These are the ways of the Goyim and of politics and religion. The Torah goes on to say, indeed, you yourselves know how we lived in the realm of the crucibles of oppression in Mitzrayim, and how to show the correct way to derive the benefits of the relationship we pass through Abar, the midst of the nations comprised of these Gentiles. We were led to do so in conjunction with Abar, Passover. Dabarym words, Deuteronomy 29:16. So we're being provided with the facts, with the evidence required to yada, to know how to become part of Yahweh's family. In addition to knowing what would cause us to be excluded, we are told what is necessary to be included. It is the truth which sets us free, just as it did for those who would have for those who listened on this day had they been receptive. Unfortunately, they didn't. The Hebrew root of Mitzrayim, the plural of Mitzri or Mitzrah, is derived from a blend of rather ominous terms, most of which emerged as a compound of ma to ponder the implications of sar, troubling oppression and persecution. These include metstrep, crucible, to test and purge; metzora, leprous, dreaded, and chronically diseased; metzar, anguishing trouble and distressful hardship; metzara, to be on guard, alerted against an impending future consequence; mitzar, lowly and little; and mitzor, to besiege. Therefore, in the plural, we might well define Mitzrayim as the crucibles of chronic and dreaded diseases, a place of anguishing hardships and distressing troubles. It is in this light that it is particularly telling to realize that many, if not most, Masur, Egyptian, Coptic Christians are ethnic Jews, the legacy of converso Jews millennia earlier. It was here that the Torah was robbed of its Hebrew roots and was bastardized, giving birth to the Hellenized Septuagint. It is here that every pre-Constantine copy of the Christian New Testament was written and later discovered. It could be stated both literally and historically that the origins of the Christian Bible, its Old and its New Testaments, were written in Greek in Alexandria rather than in Hebrew in Israel, Yahowah, or Jerusalem. If I may quote Dowd, Salah, pause now and consider those implications. One of the many things which makes the prophecies regarding the Nakri, this observant foreigner who is speaking to you, so provocative, is that Yahweh consistently tells his people that the ways of the Goyim Gentiles are an abomination, especially their religious and political practices, their military manners and customs. This is one of many such examples. The Torah reads, and you have seen the abominable religious things associated with their gods, and also that which is associated with their objects of worship and religious attire, which are expensive monetarily, often derived from silver and gold, many of which are comprised of wood or built of stone. Dabarym words 29:17. Isn't that something? So when Yahowah denounced the ways of the Goyim and told the Israelites that they should not follow in the same manner, he wasn't speaking of their ethnicity. No. This is not Jews versus Goy from a racial perspective. God has one Torah, one covenant for both. No, it is the religious ways of the Goy that God was trying to preclude his people from emulating. And yet that's what they did. The Goy were militant. They were religious. They were political. They were conspiratorial. And they were just flat out wrong about God. And yet this is what the Israelites have emulated, their abominable religious ways, and also that which is associated with their objects of worship and their religious attire. Oh, goodness gracious. Which, it's expensive, costly to one's soul. So religious gods really are eerily similar in character and disposition to the men and women who created them. In Christianity, Paul created the myth of Jesus Christ, making a God in his image, no bigger than a man. Making humankind's objects of worship a bewildering blend of contradictions and rational fallacies. For example, Allah, like Muhammad, was depicted as a terrorist throughout the Quran. Dumb as the black stone in the obscured Kaaba, the Islamic God can't keep his story straight, and he's wrong historically, scientifically, rationally, morally, and prophetically. He's dumber than stupid. With Muhammad motivated by perverted sexuality, murderous revenge, and ill-gotten gain, Muslims are conditioned to lie, to steal, and to kill for their pathetic deity, expecting perpetual virgins and a paradise as the reward for horrific behavior. This man-made God was unable to perform a single inspiring miracle, offer so much as one credible insight, or provide a single prophecy which became reality to demonstrate that he was anything more than a deification of one of the most pathetic individuals who ever lived. To believe Muhammad a rapist and pedophile, a murderous anti-Semite, a ruthless terrorist and thief, is to be ignorant, immoral, and irrational. And to be a good Muslim is to be like Muhammad. Paul's God, the Christian Jesus Christ, reflects his creator. The totality of his God fits within the human form. Folks, the God who created men is not a man. Yet this God was born and he dies. He's killed by the same Romans whom Paul claims citizenship and whom he demands submission. To believe Paul, it no longer matters what the God who created man has to say, because Christianity is based upon, but I, Paul, say. The people through whom Yahowah revealed everything became the enemy of the new faith, as the entire Gentile world is told that Paul, to the exclusion of all others, alone spoke for the reincarnated Greco-Roman Gnostic deity presented throughout the factually inaccurate and consistently contradictory verbal diarrhea that is now venerated as scripture. Paul wasn't the first to lead people astray, of course. The first king of Babylon, Nimrod, claimed to be the son of God. His wife, Astarte, worshipped as the queen of heaven and the mother of God, gave birth to what would follow as Christianity. Throughout the long march of time, the worst among us has claimed divine authority to rule, many of whom actually claim to be gods themselves, demanding veneration. This was true throughout the world, from the Aztecs and Indians, Incas and Mayans on one hemisphere, to the Carthaginians, Romans, Greeks, Babylonians, Persians, Trojans, et al. In the old world. Kings claimed they were gods. Men claimed they were gods. So in Christianity, it wasn't difficult for them to sell the idea that God was a man. It's absurd. But look today. Christians believe that God was a man. They even believe that men could kill God. Now, the irony in this is that the God who created these men and women isn't religious and doesn't want to be objectified or worshiped. Imagine creating this universe and conceiving the life within it expressly to enjoy a familiar relationship with your ultimate achievement, to enrich and empower those you have conceived, only to have these men and women ignore you. And worse, replace you in their lives with convoluted products of their twisted imaginations, and then worship these false gods like Jesus and Allah and Hashem. On one hand, we have the God who is responsible for everything. He not only revealed himself to us through Yehudim, proving his existence in the process, but he also made it possible for us to know him and live with him as his children and inherit all that he has to offer. He's brilliant, he's articulate, he's consistent, he's conversant, he's approachable, he's dependable, he's loving and lovable, enlightening and enriching, empowering and liberating. He's all we could ever want and more. But on the other hand, the religious, political, and militaristic gods of the Gentiles, and now Jews, are non-existent figments of man's imagination, complete with fabrications which require blind faith, because, well, they're mythical and mythological. They are perverted, convoluted, capricious, and fearsome, and yet always seem to support the local and national agendas, no matter how counterproductive, how covetous, how murderous the men responsible for them have been. Considering the contrast, to choose the fakes over the real, one must be ignorant, irrational, or both. And yet the fakes are believed at a ratio of, well, in this world, some 6 billion to maybe 6,000, 1,000,000 to 1. Before we contemplate Moshe's next statement, a little history lesson may be beneficial. Beginning in the 4th century BCE and in the wake of Alexander's conquests, Rabbinic Judaism became heavily influenced by Greek philosophy and culture. The Yehudim admired the Greeks to such a degree it could be argued that the story chronicled in Maccabees is actually against total assimilation. As a legacy of this conflict, the eternal Hashmonean civil war played out 40 to 70 years prior to Dowd's second arrival. It consummates and demonstrates that this integration of cultures actually occurred. The high priest at the time, Hyrcanus II, inherited the position from his father, Alexander Amanus, by way of his mother, Alexandra. All Greek names, as I'm sure you've noted. Alexandra also crowned her eldest son king, intermixing religion and politics in the way of the Gentiles, as was the case here. But Hyrcanus, the younger brother, Aristobulus II, another Greek name, rebelled against him 3 months after Alexandria's death in 67 BCE. So Hyrcanus, which means the land of the wolf, advanced against his brother, deploying a band of Gentile mercenaries. During the ensuing battle at Jericho, Aristobulus, whose name blends Ari, extraordinarily, arete, excellent and virtuous, and Aristiu, bravest, to say, well, I'm really egotistical, engaged in a manner that may have fueled anti-Semitic conspiracies. He bribed Hyrcanus, militants, offering them more money than had his brother. The mercenaries changed alliances, giving the victory to the more conniving financier. Immediately thereafter, and in direct contradiction to the Torah, Aristobulus sent his newly acquired and uncircumcised Gentile militants to the temple, where the extraordinarily excellent and brave man by his own egotistical gnome captured the realm of the wolf. Rather than kill his brother, however, the two made a deal, with Hyrcanus relinquishing the titles of high priest and king to Aristobulus for a cut of the religious but not political revenue. Yes, this is what Israel had become. This despicable of Alexander's empire, meaning like the father, the Edomite, symbolic of Rome, convinced Hyrcanus that his brother Aristobulus was too insecure and greedy to allow him to live. But in actuality, Antipater simply wanted to control Yahowah himself, with the weaker, or at least stingier, of the brothers. This wolf would be back on the throne, and he would make his move. Therefore, following the advice of his advisor, Hyrcanus, the wolf scampered off to take refuge with Aretas III, a Nabataean king whom Antipater had bribed into espousing his conspiracy. Now, this is troubling because this is where we find the Kaaba and the birthplace of Islam. With friends like these Gentiles, the revolting Jewish brothers hardly needed enemies, but nevertheless, an army of 50,000 Nabataeans advanced toward Jerusalem, coming directly north, taking the city and besieging the temple. During the siege, Onias, the last remaining stalwart against the assimilation, was stoned to death on Hyrcanus's orders for refusing to pray for the death of the wolf's rivals. Adding insult to injury, Hyrcanus, not to be outplayed financially, he swindled the priests who were supporting the extraordinarily virtuous and brave brother, this being Aristobulus. He sold them cows for the Passover sacrifice for the enormous price of 1,000 drachmas, and then refused to deliver said cows. Thus far, every word fans the flames of anti-Semitic stereotypes and conspiracies that would follow. But they did this to themselves. While this tawdry episode was brewing, the Roman general Pompey defeated the Seleucids, dispatching his deputy Marcus Saurucus to Syria. Now, because the Hasmoneans were allied with the Romans, the wolf and his egotistical brother both appealed to Zacharias, endeavoring to elicit his support, trying to bribe him with gifts. And with Aristobulus more lavish once again with his bribes, the Roman new supreme leader ordered Aretas and his Nabataean army out of Yahowah, clearing the way for Aristobulus to return to power. Now, during their retreat, however, the virtuous and brave mercenary bludgeoned the retreating army. It just gets nastier with every nuance of history, doesn't it? So with the sibling rivalry having become bloody and expensive, and yet unsettled, in 63 BCE, the Pharisees, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, all appealed to Pompey for supremacy. So now you have the Pharisees, Hyrcanus the wolf, and Aristobulus the egotistical one. They all wanted Romans to establish their supremacy. No interest in God. Romans were more powerful in their view. The Roman was, as was the custom among wolves, chose, of course, the wolf. but not because of Romulus and Remus, I'm told. As the weakest of them, Pompey believed that Hyrcanus, the wolf, would be the easiest to manipulate. Then, to make certain that they would all be compliant and that Roman authority would remain unchallenged, the evil empire dispatched their legions, suffocating Yahowah, Judah. Aristobulus, with his enormous ego bruised, turned traitor and, like a child throwing a tantrum, sought to hand Jerusalem over to Pompey. But unable to trust Aristobulus nor Rome, the extraordinarily virtuous and brave followers did not capitulate. So the Romans besieged Jerusalem and captured the city by force, nearly destroying the temple in the process. Aristobulus was taken to Rome as a prisoner, and Hyrcanus was hailed as king. Quite a story, isn't it? Is it any wonder God is opposed to all forms of human religiousness and governance, particularly among his people? They were no longer his people. Unfortunately for the wolf, the new gig wasn't as lucrative as the religious authority. So since it had always been about the shekels, that same year the wolf reclaimed his position as high priest. As he did, the Romans set the menacing advisor, Antipater, on the throne. Well, things remained as such until 40 BCE, when Aristobulus' son, Antigonus, allied with the Parthians, and with the muscle of these Iranians, and thus in the company of the Persian gods, Antigonus was proclaimed king and high priest. The wolf was seized and his ears were mutilated, with Antigonus literally biting them off to assure that the wolf would be permanently ineligible for the priesthood. The earless carnivore was taken by the Parthians to Babylon, where he lived in captivity with other Jews, all of whom, we are told, embraced and respected this putrid excuse of a man. Shortly thereafter, in 36 BCE, Herod defeated Antigonus, with the help, of course, of Rome and her legions. The conniving bastard, fearing that Hyrcanus might induce the Parthians to help him regain the throne of Yahowah, invited the aging and earless wolf back to Jerusalem. Hyrcanus accepted the invitation of Rome's appointed king, only to have Herod charge him with plotting against the Nabataeans against his authority, or with the Nabataeans against his authority. And the Roman puppet then assassinated the Parthian stooge. Yahowah and Yehudim were lost in a sea of Goyim, with no one to blame but themselves, because they had brought the Goyim to bear and used the Goyim to assert their authenticity. They were doing exactly the opposite of what God had requested of them. And this, at long last, brings us to a statement that is presented in Dabarym words, Deuteronomy 29:18, which is therefore prophetic of what would occur. I'll read it to you and we'll conclude our program. Their purpose negated. No one exists among you at this time, not a man nor a woman, not a group of people nor a tribe, whose reasoning or inclinations are found directed towards the presence of Yahowah, our God. Not one of you, not among the entire nation of Israel, is there a single person whose inclinations, whose attitude was directed toward God. They're all going after, approaching, worshiping, and serving the gods of the Gentile nations. And it is true to this day. Negated and without purpose, there will be among you a root bearing that which is infuriating and noxious, poisonous and embittering. Dabarym, words, Deuteronomy 29:18. And that embittering, poisonous, and toxic relationship between Israel and God not only is manifest at this time, it is celebrated in the irrational ignorance of Judaism, in Christianity, and in Islam, all of which are the product of Jewish malfeasance. So I thank you for listening. Look forward to being back with you. I'm delighted to be back in our ocean studio and to be able to invite you to this wonderful perch over the sea as we return to it again later this week. I appreciate you listening. Good day.